Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, we discuss the silent crisis of student mental health. It's important to have a shared understanding of how the complexities of absenteeism intertwine with the mental well-being of our students. And I think learning and understanding more about the crucial connection between absenteeism and mental health is important because it can help you to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for your students. So, if you're currently grappling with the challenges of absenteeism and its impact on your students' mental health, then this episode is for you because it can equip you with some valuable insights and strategies to foster a more nurturing educational setting. Some of the main topics we'll be covering include that interplay between chronic absenteeism and mental health issues, exploring the structural challenges of accessing external support for absenteeism, and we'll examine proactive measures to prioritize student mental well-being. At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you can find some free resources, subscribe on YouTube, and now let's head over to this discussion already rolling with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan.
What I found interesting about that article from the States in Virginia, and it does have some parallels in Canada, but they have a very siloed structure of who supports when and where. And their argument, the argument of the people who wrote the article was that unless we can get chronic absenteeism recognized as educational neglect, we can't trigger the supports that are necessary because those supports have to come from that agency. And right now, we can't go to that agency for support because absenteeism isn't on the list. But if we can get it on the list and call it educational neglect, now we've got millions of dollars worth of people that can now come and help support those families. I think basically what they're saying is we need support from outside agents. We can't get it under the present system. But then I did some further reading, found that not a lot of states offer social support for absenteeism. They don't see it as something that it requires agency support. It's a school problem and let the schools deal with it.
And I would say that I can speak for Ontario is seen very much the same way. We may not have the same structure, but it's seen as a school issue.
Right.
And there's lots of reasons. Funding from all sorts of places, having the muscle doesn't necessarily mean you have a great rapport to go in and have these discussions. The schools haven't always welcomed opinions from other agencies to say, actually, this is what's going on for this family. And attendance isn't something we're going to tackle right now. So there's a whole lot of things going on there and a whole lot of egos and a lot of overworked people as well. So it is complicated for sure.
It lets you off the hook a little bit if when you're talking with people about all of this, that you say, if only the police would do, or if only social services would do, or if only in this case, child protection would have educational neglect. And then those guys aren't doing what they need to do.
This whole article was centered around the mental well-being of kids. And in this state, Virginia, they can't access mental well-being supports unless they have the kid labeled as chronically as educational neglect from parents. And then they can access supports for mental health needs of the children. And in a way, we've been doing that. And we played that game for years as principals and as educators. We'd say, what's the flavor of the well, everybody's focusing on bullying. So if we can label this a bullying situation, we can get support for it. Now it's mental health. If we can say that there's some mental health issues, now we can get the mental health people. They'll come in. So we all play these games where we got to figure out where we get the support from. Let's relabel something, let's reclassify it, and then we can support. And that's really what they're trying to do in this state is they recognize that there's a lot of mental health issues rising out of absenteeism. And where can we get support? The only place we can get support is from this agency. We can access that agency unless we relabel it.
And it's not just like mental health is this great big umbrella, but it's anxiety, it's depression, it's suicidal ideation. Like the numbers that they talk about, like it's 10 to 13% in middle school and high school of kids who have considered suicide. Like this is a significant number, like 1 in 10. My goodness. Like this is what they're talking about in terms of this silent crisis, because nobody's addressing that part of it.
But this is what we
Okay.
have to have a physical crisis happen, and then we have a change in behaviors or approaches for a while, and then we move back into our patterns. But that's how we always function. It's
We're
crisis
always
focus,
reactionary.
reactionary. Yes.
We're reactionary. We're not proactive. We've always in school had kids who are anxious and that kind of stuff, but not to this extent, not to the numbers. And so really, when I looked at absenteeism, they said, to an extent, absenteeism is part of the causing this. But I'm thinking, is absenteeism a cause or is it an effect? Are kids now, because they've been absent from school so much, now experiencing greater mental health issues? So they spend all their time at home on social media, and that we know what social media can do in terms of kids' mental health and how they feel about themselves. You're on the wrong things. But if they're at school every day, do we have a chance to then bring them into the fold and build better relationships with them, and then maybe see the signs earlier so we can get onto this on these earlier?
The thing that gets educators' attention, though, is student achievement. And what they're saying very clearly in this article is that this absenteeism issue is impacting student achievement and mental health. We're finding out that because kids weren't in school, they didn't do as well during COVID. And now the way to address student achievement is to have kids in school. And interestingly enough, that's also the best place to be when you have mental health concerns, because that's where you're going to build those connections between your peers, between teachers and students. This comes back to some of the basic things about restorative practices, right? That sense of belonging, voice, and agency. Like, unless we get them back into school, kids don't have a sense of belonging. And the longer they stay out of school, the less they feel they belong. And then it just spirals down.
And it almost sounds it's getting back to the basics that we know have supported kids and made them feel like school is part of their community. It's not a place they have to just go, that they want to go and they feel connected there. And whether that's food, whether that's extracurriculars, whether that's a safe place at lunch, whether it's hanging out with the other kids that think like you and have a spot to go do that.
And I think the intention needs to be to build the mental health of kids, like that needs to start moving up on the list of priorities, and that mental health and the relief of anxiety and depression and isolation needs to be something that it's not just science that we're teaching. It's not just math. It's not just language. It's using those to also build the mental health of the students. And that's very proactive, I would say, restorative approach.
It raises for me the question on the flip side. Let's say in a perfect world, we could get all these kids back to school tomorrow. We had 100% attendance. Now, what are we going to do with them? Are we just going to go back and do the same old stuff that we were doing before that drove them away and kept them away? Or are we going to change our approaches to kids, and we're going to start to have the conversations that we need to have with kids and allow them, make them feel as though they're part of the classroom and school community by having classroom circles and opening up the conversations to difficult topics and making them feel welcome and safe and rest.
So what's it going to take to change that mindset, to make that shift? For just imagine for a second, you're a social worker, a child and youth worker, a principal, a teacher. What's it going to take for you to make that kind of change?
Be open, look at differently. And we certainly have done that for special needs students. So we do understand that needs to happen. The difference from when we attended school, how special needs students were included or not included to now is tremendous. But mental health concerns are invisible many times. And so we don't respond, or we think people are just using it as an excuse in some way until it gets very serious.
You mentioned special ed students and how we work. And they all have individual education plans and meetings all the time. And the plans are revisited, rethought of, and they get special report cards. None of that existed 25 years ago,
No.
3 years ago. That's a relatively new change to the structure of education. And it came about because there was this huge groundswell of people said, look, we've got all these kids here that are struggling. We need to do things differently for them. And so maybe that's the mindset it has to look at it. And keep in mind, that didn't start in a school level, but it started at schools, but it also started from the top down as well. The funding had to be there to support what everybody was saying was needed for the kids. We need special ed teachers. They need to have time to be in smaller classes. And we need to have time to have the meetings, develop the paperwork, tracks these kids and gives them what they need. So while individual schools can track certain kids and say, we need to do things differently for this child, they also need the support. Yeah. And I think right now in Ontario, we're not getting that. What the push in Ontario now is we need to do better at teaching math. We need to get back to basics. How are people supposed to then say, but the needs of our kids in our school are different? Yes, we'll keep teaching math and we'll learn the new math and we'll teach it, but we got to do these other things first. And so that they need that permission. We talked a lot about the permission. Teachers need permission from their principal to take some time to have classroom circles. Principals need permission from their superintendents and from their directors to say, it's okay for you to do this and go in this direction for a while because the kids need it. Of course, directors need the permission from the provincial government that says it's okay to do this, as well as the money to support it.
If I think to some major changes in attitudes, the two that come to mind are smoking and seatbelts.
Yes.
And when both smoking and seatbelts became public health issues, where everyone got on side with this idea that we need to do something about smoking in public places and just smoking in general because of the cost in terms of human lives, but just the cost of not doing anything until education kind of finds itself in that sort of setting of being a public health approach or issue. It's going to take that much, I think, to make the change. And in that is the multi-agency approach. People are seeing this in mental health agencies. They're seeing this in child protection. They're seeing this in law enforcement. And how can we bring all of those groups together so that it doesn't become a silent crisis like West Virginia, but that it actually becomes a conversational crisis, one that we're talking about, one that everybody is on the same page with this. Because right now, that's not the sense that I get. And certainly this article points out, if it's a silent crisis, nobody knows about it. When you read the article and hear this podcast, the urgency for collaborative action in addressing the silent crisis of student mental health becomes undeniable. Let's heed that call for systemic change, break down the silos, and foster a multi-agency approach to support our students in need. We need to have educators who are willing to have and lead these difficult conversations with community partners. Check out our website, www.restorative.ca, for more insights into connecting student attendance and student mental health. Together, let's pave the way for resilient and empathetic schools filled with educators like you that value holistic development of our students.